Here we go.
Hello, Markus.
President, nice meeting you.
So nice to see you. How are you?
Thank you so much. How are you?
Good. I'm doing fine.
This is the safest room all over the world.
There are probably a few safer, but it's wonderful to see you. Thank you so much.
Which one?
Well, you're right. These days, the Oval Office may not be as safe.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people are getting sick in there.
That's right. Even the
Secret
security,
Service.
right? The Secret Service,
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So, well, welcome.
Yeah.
When did you arrive?
On Friday.
On Friday.
Friday, yeah.
Well, it's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you so much.
How long have you been doing your show?
For 12 years now.
12 years?
Yeah. We were just talking about Tony Blair. I interviewed him once and asked him if he's regretting the Iraq war.
Yeah.
And he was
No?
very massive, yeah. He didn't like the question. No, not at all, not at all.
Well, I hear that you have a wonderful viewership in Germany. So
Thank you so much.
You developed a good
Yeah, that's right.
a good fan base.
Mr. President, first of all, fascinating book.
Thank you so much.
Great writing. I really enjoyed it a lot. But I think the only thing is it's a bit too short, maybe.
Well,
Only 1,018 pages.
As I said in my preface, you know, I wish that I could have the skill of writing more briefly, but you know, a lot happened during those years, in those early years of my presidency.
Absolutely. Before we start, I was wondering on the flight while I was reading the last few pages of the book, I was wondering what will he do if his wife Michelle is going to sell by the end maybe more copies than he does.
Oh, well,
will he accept the result or will he go to court and demand a recount?
I've already surrendered. I've already conceded. You know, Michelle's book was wonderful, and you know, the story she told about her family, I think, is something that everybody could relate to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Let's go into it. How did you experience the night recently, the night of the election, when Donald Trump declared his own victory and demanded to stop the voting?
Having seen how he operated during the course of the last 4 years, I was not surprised that he wasn't gracious in accepting his loss. He had already indicated that unless he won, he was not going to accept the results. But I was actually excited for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who I think will do an excellent job. I know them both well. They're longtime friends. I think we have a chance to restart America in a direction that is more compassionate and more rational.
Well, it's going to be difficult, right?
But it's going to be a tough job.
I mean, it's more restoring, right?
Yeah.
You tried to start a revolution, and Trump was a revolution as well.
Yeah.
But now he has to rebuild it.
He has to rebuild
fix it.
Yeah, and now keep in mind, as I write about in the book, I came in during a crisis period in 2008, 2009. We were going through the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression, since the 30s. And so I know what Joe will be facing. The good news is he has the experience, and I think he will have the staff around him to make good choices. And, you know, obviously relevant to your audiences, I think Joe is very much rooted in the belief of the importance of the transatlantic relationship. And I think on foreign policy, his ability very quickly to send a signal that we are stronger when we work with our allies like Germany, I think that will be very important as well.
Donald Trump is basically refusing to cooperate till now. How did you handle the transition 4 years ago? When did you call him?
Well, you know, I called him very late because that race was also close, although the interesting thing is that Hillary Clinton, I think, acknowledged by the end of that evening that she likely had lost. So I called him probably 2:30 in the morning, and congratulated him. And then I invited Donald Trump to the White House, as had been the tradition. Part of the way I looked at it was George W. Bush, despite deep disagreements on policy between me and him, was very gracious and effective in the transition process. And my goal was to duplicate that peaceful transfer of power. It's unfortunate that Donald Trump has not decided to do that. I'm not surprised that he has not decided to do that. I think that will inhibit the new Biden administration from hitting the ground running as well as it could have, because they're not getting briefings and getting clearances on intelligence and so forth that they should. But at the end of the day, on January 20th, America will have a new president and a new vice president, and that promises a new day in terms of both domestic and foreign policy.
Absolutely. Yeah. If we look back a little bit, was it easier to move into the White House 12 years ago, or easier to leave it 4 years ago?
There's no doubt that leaving was bittersweet. It was easier to leave in the sense that I was ready after 8 years. I felt that I had run the good race. I had accomplished a lot, not everything that I wanted, but I was very proud of the work that we had done. It was bittersweet because the person who was coming in was somebody who I knew
did the opposite.
Basically opposed anything I proposed, no matter what. When you leave, for me at least, what I missed was the camaraderie of the team. I think it's very rare where you find yourself in a circumstance where you're under such enormous stress and you're doing so much difficult work, and you build a bond with the people that you're working with. And I was very fortunate to have wonderful staff and cabinet and advisors. And you know that you'll never have that same kind of relationship, even though they remain friends. So, there was a loss there. But it was moving in. The physical part of moving in is easy. Somebody else does it for you. But arriving and then suddenly realizing you are in charge of
you are in office.
Everything.
When did you realize that you are the President of the United States now?
The interesting thing for me, because we had a crisis and because there was close cooperation between myself and the outgoing Bush administration, I already felt the weight of responsibility even before I was sworn into office. We were already having to coordinate to deal with what are we going to do about the banking system, how are we going to manage what is clearly going to be a massive unemployment problem. How do we, at that time, the housing market had collapsed. How are we going to deal with that? So I was already consulting with and working with the Treasury Secretary and the Federal Reserve Bank and so forth. So it was a more gradual rather than an abrupt moment. Now, the first day that you walk into the Oval Office, and you realize that anything you see in the newspapers, anything you see on TV, any problem anywhere in the world is now your problem also. That obviously gives you a momentary jolt. And I think the first...
But emotionally, was it the first night or was it...
Well, it is interesting. I've mentioned to friends of mine, the first night that you sleep in the White House... Because you brush your teeth, you do your normal routine, and then you get under the covers, and then suddenly you realize this is not my house. This is the people's house. So you're suddenly sleeping in a museum, and that's different, I think, for a lot of world leaders, European leaders. I always used to envy the fact that many prime ministers, they keep their own home. And the official residence is really used for ceremonial purposes. Here, you really suddenly find yourself living in a completely different environment, and it was not just obviously an adjustment for me, but also for Michelle and our daughters.
What did you tell the kids, for example? I mean, how do you explain what's going on?
The good news was the girls were young enough. I think when Malia was 10, Sasha was 7. They're pretty flexible, and the one thing that Michelle was very smart about, she said, okay, we have to make sure that their rooms don't look like, the residence of Thomas Jefferson, right? So she had already arranged so that there'd be some modern furniture and that it would look more like a girl's room, a young girl's room rather than something that was in a museum somewhere.
Yeah, what I didn't know until I read it in the book is how deep the impact is. I mean, it already changed when you moved back to Chicago for these 2 months.
That's exactly.
You described. You say it's kind of it was like my own mobile ghost town. I mean, inside the apartment, everything was still the same.
Yeah.
But what was different?
The biggest adjustment that you have to make psychologically, mentally, is the security bubble that you're suddenly under. And that started happening for me quite early because I was subject to more threats than previous candidates. Mm-hmm. And by the time you are officially announced as president, suddenly you are completely surrounded. So when you drive down the street, there are no cars on the street. When you no longer walk through a normal hotel lobby, you go through a back way. And
snipers on the rooftops?
And there's snipers on the rooftops.
Just
and
you look out of your window and you see...
Well, if you're looking carefully, you might be able to spot them. But the point is that the normal interactions that you have with people suddenly changes. You're in what's called the bubble. And it's something that I never got used to. As I write about in the book, there's... even 2 years into my presidency, I would still have recurring dreams where, and it was the same dream every time, where I'd be walking through a city and nobody knew who I was. And I could just, look at people or sit at an outdoor cafe and have a coffee or a drink. And that idea of being able to move through the world anonymously. That has changed.
A loss of anonymity.
Yeah.
What does it mean?
Which is something that you don't fully appreciate until you've lost it. Now, this is not a complaint. Obviously, the privilege that you have in terms of being able to serve as president outweighs all of that. But it is something that you never, at least I never fully adjusted to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Till now. I mean, it never comes back.
It never really comes back.
Never.
Because now the security perimeter is smaller, but the celebrity aspects of it haven't changed. So, I used to think that once I'm done being president, now I go back to normal life. Go back to normal life. Yeah. And a couple of times I tried. I'd be in New York and I said, well, let's just walk through Central Park, or we were in Milan, and I thought, our hotel was right on the piazza, and we were going to go to a
Piazza Duomo.
Yeah, exactly. We were going to go and across the piazza, and suddenly there were 5,000 people around the hotel, and you realized, okay, that part of your life is gone. And now what we benefited from, we had some very good close friends who remained in our circle throughout the presidency. My mother-in-law moved into the White House. She was very much a stabilizing influence because she is not impressed with all these things. And so
which is good, yeah.
So Michelle and I think, did a good job of maintaining our sense of who we were and transmitting to our children, which was very important to us, a sense that, look, this is temporary. I know this seems like a strange thing, but
I fully understand.
You're going to have to learn how to move through the world and not think you are somehow better than anybody else. And I'm one of the great gifts. One of the things I'm most proud of coming out of the presidency is that Malia and Sasha have turned out to be wonderful young ladies. They don't feel entitled. They're kind to everybody and polite, and they work hard, and they don't have that sense of somehow privilege. But we were worried about that when we
imagine.
Took the job.
What I didn't understand before I read it on the book, you basically spent 8 years in this small little room called the Oval Office.
Right.
So you were a prisoner of the Oval Office,
well,
kind of.
I think it was Bill Clinton who once called the White House the crown jewel of the federal penitentiary system.
Okay.
which is a good analogy. Now, one advantage was people came to me. I didn't have to go to them, which meant that my commute was very short. As I described at the opening of the book, you walk from the residence to your office. It takes 1 minute.
Yeah.
And what that allowed me to do was to be home for dinner every night. I actually was able to see my daughters much more than I had before I was in the White House.
It's kind of a long home office.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's like you have, you live above the store.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think Donald Trump spent almost his 4 years into the Oval Office, or more upstairs where the TV is?
I really don't know.
Yeah. Let's talk about responsibility. I mean, if you're in there and you describe it, everything gets yours then. I mean, even George W. Bush's wars, they become your wars.
Right. That's exactly right. And as I try to describe, I think even though the office is still the most powerful on earth, the fact is that no one president can completely start with a blank page. He, and hopefully at some point she, is inheriting a whole range of decisions that have been made by your predecessors. New circumstances arise. You spend a lot of time managing problems that you've inherited. And in my case, that was a global financial crisis. We had a war in Iraq. We had a war in Afghanistan.
Right. You spend a lot of money. I did learn from the book, like $500 per day.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
500 million.
Million, yeah. $500 million per day.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the amount of resources and energy that were involved in Iraq and Afghanistan were so large, and unwinding it was very difficult. And in the case of Iraq, by the time I took office, we had already begun the process of staging down that war. It still took 2 more years before we were able to get U.S. troops, the majority of U.S. troops out. In the case of Afghanistan, this is a country that was very fragile to begin with. I had to make a decision to actually send more troops in temporarily in order to ensure that the Kabul government didn't collapse. And each of these decisions, as I try to describe, are imperfect. The thing that you learn as president, I think any global leader recognizes, you're often dealing with probabilities. You get a choice that maybe is 55% better, 45% worse. You don't know exactly whether it's going to work or not, and it's rarely going to work exactly as you intended.
Did you have sleepless nights because of the drone strikes, for example?
Well,
because there's people dying all the time.
Yeah, I will say that the weight of decisions, particularly around war and counterterrorism, always weighed on me. First and foremost, because you're committing young people who you are responsible for to the possibility of death or grievous injury. And so, I described the process of signing letters to families of those who've fallen. You never get used to that. And that stays with you. I'd often go visit the hospitals where the wounded warriors would come home and were being treated. And it was a reminder that even wars that are justified, and I thought that the Afghanistan war was justified. I disagreed with the Iraq war, but I thought after 9/11, what the Taliban had done to host al-Qaeda justified us taking those steps. Even when wars are justified, there's still a tragedy involved in any war. I never got comfortable I never allowed myself to ignore the human costs of that. Now, I will admit it was rare where I did not sleep because usually I was so tired by the time everything was finished that when my head hit the pillow, I'd be out because I wasn't getting that much sleep to begin with.
By the end of the book, you're writing about it's a very strange moment, must have been a very strange moment. In 2011, two guys showed up. One was Osama bin Laden, the other one was Donald Trump.
Right.
The White House Correspondents' Dinner. I mean, you stay up there on stage, making jokes about Donald Trump, showing to the people how White House would look like if he moves in.
Say what you will about Mr. Trump, he certainly would bring some change to the White House. Let's see what we've got up there.
Really funny, by the way. And having in mind that in Abbottabad, the mission against Osama bin Laden is going on. So how was this situation?
Well, part of the reason that I decided to end the first volume of this book at that moment, originally when I was writing, I thought that I would end with my re-election. I decided to end here because I thought that contrast indicated a theme of the book, which is that America has this enormous capacity to work together to do very difficult things. And the raid against bin Laden was a very difficult and serious and risky mission.
Risky. I was so surprised by reading the book how uncertain you were whether if he was there or not.
There was no guarantee that he was even there, much less that it would be successful. And obviously there would have been huge diplomatic ramifications, political ramifications if we had gotten it wrong. So I'm making these very tough decisions. And at the same time, what you also saw was the circus of politics in this country. And Donald Trump at that time was promoting what came to be known as birtherism, this theory that I was not born in the United States.
Did you take it for serious?
Initially, I didn't take it seriously.
Tonight, for the first time, I am releasing my official birth video. No one has seen this footage in 50 years, not even me. But let's take a look. I want to make clear to the Fox News table that was a joke.
These kinds of strange conspiracy theories had been floating around on the internet for years. But what I did not expect was the media to start taking Donald Trump seriously when he promoted this. And as I recorded in that chapter, the anger and frustration I felt in having to spend time or see my staff spend time answering these ridiculous charges at the same time as we are trying to focus on a mission in which Navy SEALs, very brave and skilled individuals, are risking their lives.
And having this huge social gap into your country. You write that in 2007, it was crystal clear that American economy produced more inequality than any other economy in the Western world. So was Donald Trump the answer to that inequality? What do you think?
I think many of the underlying issues that he came to represent existed before him, and they will exist after him. In the United States, there has always been a dueling set of ideas. We have the Declaration of Independence and the idea that all people are created equal, but we also had slavery, and we also had women not being able to vote, and people without property not being able to vote, and Native Americans who had no rights that were recognized in a serious way. And part of the story of America is this battle between those who want to include more people in this idea of we the people and broaden our democracy and broaden our economy to give opportunity to all people, and those who think, no, those privileges belong to a few people, but not all people. And oftentimes that's along the fault line of race, but it's also class. And I think that we have made enormous progress, obviously, since our founding. My presidency represented, in part, that expansion of the idea of democracy. But it didn't solve all these problems that were there. And Donald Trump and many in the Republican Party have oftentimes tried to exploit the continuing tribal frictions that exist in our society to their own advantage. And I think that what is also true is that there are a lot of blue-collar, working-class, white, rural voters and those outside the cities who resented and were frustrated by globalization, shifts in technology, cultural changes, demographic changes. That's not unique to the United States. We see that in Europe as well. And it is one of the responsibilities, I think, of those of us who think of ourselves as progressive, to have better answers for how do we create an economy in which workers, manufacturing workers, people who are outside of these metropolitan areas, that they don't feel like they're losing ground, that they don't feel as if they are falling behind. And we haven't always done that as well as we should have.
I remember I was here for a documentary 4 years ago, right before the election. And we would meet people who did avoid just to spell his name. They called him 45. But then in Texas, I met a guy who didn't want to call your name. He was like, there's a man in the White House who hates America. Number 44. That was...
Right. Yeah, and look, the country is divided right now. And as I say in the preface to my book, we don't yet know how it's going to play itself out. What gives me confidence and optimism that the more inclusive vision of America will ultimately win out is when you look at young people and their voting patterns and their attitudes. My daughters and their friends and that generation of Americans, I much more than their parents or their grandparents, assume that people are entitled to respect and dignity regardless of their race or religion or their sexual orientation. And so you saw that in part during the summer after the murder of George Floyd and the protests against police actions and excessive violence against black men, that the protests were not just made up of African Americans. They were made up of people from all walks of life. And that, I think, is the future of America. But those who are looking backwards and cling to the past, they still have a very powerful voice and are still a powerful political force in America.
You're right. It was as if my very presence in the White House had triggered a deep-seated panic.
Yeah, and so I think that was true for a number of people. It was part of the reason why I ended up getting such deep Republican resistance to when we tried to pass the Affordable Care Act, the health care plan, that actually took a model that Mitt Romney, a Republican, had implemented in his state. So this wasn't a wild left-wing idea that we were proposing.
And you have been the Antichrist. This is what I realized. Have you ever been scared? I mean, for your family, how did you talk with Michelle about it?
Look, I think that when you take this office, you assume that there are some risks involved. The Secret Service is very good and very thorough, and so I wasn't personally fearful. I think I was saddened and troubled by the degree to which I could be characterized in this way, because I think it made it clear that it was going to be difficult to actually get things done.
Yeah.
And, I had started seeing this during the campaign. It got worse. And one of the things that I try to explore in the book is the role that media played in this process.
It wasn't only Fox News.
It wasn't just Fox News. It was mainstream media as well. But I think that what you start seeing is a splintering of the news. And social media has now accelerated this. When I was growing up, you had 3 news stations. Everybody watched the same thing. So whether you were conservative or liberal, Democrat or Republican, you watched Walter Cronkite. You had a basic common view of the facts.
And you didn't have alternative facts.
Yeah, what's changed is you now have an alternative reality. If you watch Fox News, you listen to Rush Limbaugh, you go into Facebook and you go to these far-right sites, they just make things up. And for those who are consuming that news, it's very hard to break through. And we're seeing the consequences of when you get this detachment from reality and how COVID's been handled. As we speak here, we are seeing records broken in the number of cases. You're seeing hospitalizations and deaths go up significantly, and yet you still have a White House that is claiming that this is all going to be fine. And there is a large portion of the country that believes that, despite the fact that in those communities where people were refusing to wear masks and ignoring basic concepts of social distancing, you have seen some of the highest, most elevated rates of infection.
And still they are going to vote him, like 70 million people.
Yeah. Which indicates, look, one thing that
What does it say to you?
Well, one thing that I came to realize is that people vote not so much based on policy, not even based on facts. They vote on stories. What's the story that makes sense to them and just helps them explain their lives and their world. And I became president, frankly, because I told a pretty good story about what America could be and should be. Most of the people who voted for me, they didn't know every aspect of my health care plan or my immigration plan, but they knew my vision. And the people who vote for Donald Trump, they have embraced the story he told, that they find comforting in some way. And once somebody accepts one of those stories, it's very hard to
change the narrative.
To change the narrative, because people will block facts that contradict the story. They don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
And I think that the media landscape now and the internet, which allows you to select your own facts, right? You don't have to hear a different point of view. That makes it easier to ignore facts and hang on to your support of somebody even when they've proven incompetent. This is a long-term problem for democracy because the idea of democracy, particularly if you are in a big, diverse country like the United States, depends on us being able to agree on a basic set of facts. We can have different opinions about what to do about those facts. So, we can disagree on how should we handle climate change. You may decide, look, it's too late. We should just adapt, but there's no point in us, hurting our economy. Mm-hmm. And I may argue, no, we should try to change how we use energy because this is unsustainable. Mm-hmm. But at least we can have that debate because we agree that the temperature is actually rising. Mm-hmm. But if you say to me, the temperature is not rising, this is just made up, I don't believe it. Now you have a great deal of difficulty in trying to figure out how to solve those problems. And that, I think, is something that we're going to have to address, not just here in the United States, but in Germany throughout Europe.
Right. May I ask one last question?
Yes.
Which is, how has the fact that you have been surrounded by women all your life formed your character?
Well, for the better. No, look, I have always had strong women in my life. It has made me very clear about the importance of listening to women's voices and promoting women into leadership. I'm thrilled about the fact that Kamala Harris will be the first female vice president of the United States. Your own Angela Merkel, I think, is an example of one of my favorite partners on the world stage, who's held, not just led Germany, but has led Europe for so long. I think the capacity of women to make smart decisions, to not be fueled by ego and trying to prove things, but rather to get things done, is something that that's a generalization, but I think men oftentimes are more likely to be ego-driven rather than task-driven. Look, Michelle and my daughters, they're what kept me sane during what was admittedly a crazy experience.
Thank you so much. And I will tell Angela Merkel, because you mentioned her, that Joe Biden, as you describe in the book, is talking very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful to be with you.
Great experience.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Good.
It was fantastic.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I enjoyed the conversation.